It is my greatest pleasure to moderate today's discussion. When we had on the first day a discussion about non-proliferation arms control disarmament issues, challenges and opportunities, particularly for the Africa region, in my presentation, I mentioned the peaceful uses of nuclear technology applications and many other scientific developments and applications that are particularly relevant for the Africa region. They're relevant for everyone, but we strongly discuss the need for an even more accelerated use and application of these technologies for developing countries in order to meet the sustainable development goals, the 2030 agenda. And there are many of these technologies that are working on the cutting edge, an intersection between applications for supporting and sustaining various regimes and within the international organizations. Many of these technologies are applicable to real impact on the economic development, on health, on crops, and many, many other applications really critical for the continent. And many of the participants, as far as I understand, already work in some of this field. But as discussion with many policymakers, including diplomats, demonstrates that quite often there is a very limited knowledge about those who not necessarily work specifically in this field. And I thought we would have and when the organizers offered to hold this panel, I thought it's a great opportunities to both highlight some of these technologies that are already used in the field, see what are the new developments and techniques, and also talk about some of the challenges and opportunities, particularly in the African context. What we will do is we'll actually go in a little bit of a different order than the panel was originally in the program. We rearranged it a little bit. But we do have an exceptionally knowledgeable set of specialists who work in this field and who work on a number of technologies or work on facilitating the use of others of these technologies. The way we will go with the order of discussion would be the following. First, I'll give the floor to my colleague, Ingrid Kirsten, who is a Senior Research Associate at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Before that, she worked as a diplomat representing South Africa here in Vienna. Before her diplomatic post in Vienna in association with the Foreign Ministry, she also worked as a researcher at the New Partnership for Africa's Development and managed stakeholders relations for the International Food Policy Research Institute. And at our center, she's leading the work focused on peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology applications and their intersection with nuclear security and how to expand their use in application.
Thank you so much, Elena. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm going to, in the short time that's available, I'm going to talk to you about focus on non-power applications. Oh, let me just see, how does this work? Why is it not going down? Okay, wait, how do I move my, oh, I do that, okay, sorry. So I'm going to focus on this sustainable use of non-power applications for agriculture and human health. I'm going to tell you a bit about what the technologies are used for, what technologies are used in these applications, the benefits of the applications, and the building blocks for sustainable use. So sustainability is the use of nuclear technology basically means the safe application and protection of radioactive material from theft and misuse, the ability of countries to access the technologies and to apply them successfully and routinely, and the political commitment and mainstream of peaceful uses in policy frameworks. So there are various technologies. We have radioisotope technologies. These are radioisotopes such as cesium-137 and cobalt-60, which are contained in sealed sources, commonly referred to as gamma sources, and manufactured into specific devices for medical, industrial, and research applications. While there are many advantages to gamma sources, there are also disadvantages. For example, the need for precautions to prevent exposure of individuals to harmful radiation and the fact that the source of radiation is always on, thus requiring shielding, safe storage, and proper disposal at the end of its useful life. Security risks related to the malicious use of lost or stolen radioactive sources used in these applications also have to be managed. There are non-isotopic alternative technologies, and the most advanced and commercially viable alternative technologies for these applications are devices that use electricity to produce X-rays or electron beam, E-beam radiation. And then there are nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants, and nuclear research reactors, which you will hear a lot more about later today. For the benefits or the applications of these nuclear technologies, some quick examples. Nuclear technologies are applied for the improvement of a wide variety of crops through the irradiation of seeds and plant materials. The joint FAO-IEA division has been at the forefront of developing this technology and has been supporting countries in the application of technology to improve the yield and quality of crops for more than 50 years. Bangladesh is a really good example of one of the most densely populated countries in the world and the most vulnerable to impact of climate change. And it's been using this nuclear technology to increase the quality and productivity of its crops. So plant mutation breeding is credited with making Bangladesh the third largest rice producer in the world. And new rice varieties that are developed by Bangladesh include climate-smart genetic traits such as resistance to high temperatures, drought, winds, and high salinity in the soil. For the irradiation of seeds, Bangladesh uses gamma sources. It has 2 gamma irradiators, and Japan has irradiated seeds for it in their heavy ion beam accelerators. X-ray technology is also a potential viable alternative to radioactive sources, but requires more research and development. So insect pests have a significant impact on agricultural production and food security. Plant pests, such as fruit flies, account for 40% of the world's pre- and post-harvest losses, and livestock pests, which include screwworms and tsetse flies, have a substantial impact on livestock production. The sterile insect technique is an environmentally friendly pest control that uses radiation to sterilize male insects in special rearing facilities. In South Africa, the citrus industry, which was on the brink of collapse as a result of devastation wreaked by the false codling moth, was saved by a public-private partnership which produces and releases 40 million sterile moths every week in an area of about 15,000 hectares. South Africa is the second largest exporter of citrus fruit in the world, and exports with over 1.4 billion US dollars. So direct losses from bovine trypanosomosis transmitted by the tsetse fly in Africa are estimated to range from 600 million US dollars to 1.2 billion every year. The SIT has resulted in the eradication of the tsetse fly from Zanzibar in 1998 and has been implemented in Ethiopia and Senegal, where the suppression of this pest is already contributing to food security and socioeconomic progress. Cobalt-60 devices are commonly used for insect sterilization, and currently alternative technology options for SIT applications are limited. Furthermore, there is an insufficient market size for SIT to incentivize commercial developers to produce specialized SIT devices. For nuclear technologies play a central role in the timely diagnosis and effective treatment of cancer. Cobalt-60 teletherapy devices are the mainstay of treatment of cancer. They're robust, inexpensive to run, light on electricity, and require minimal maintenance. But there are security concerns as the sources are becoming more expensive and harder to come by, and there are growing costs related to the management and disposal of the sources. Hospitals and regulators are under pressure to replace cobalt devices with linear accelerators, use electricity to produce radiation, and also offer more precise treatment. They are widely used, but have to be adequately adapted for developing country conditions. The next speakers will speak to this in more detail. So we know that the sustainable development in Africa is not a one-size-fits-all. There are many challenges, where there's 33 of the 54 countries are considered least developed countries. 28 countries in Africa do not have a single radiotherapy machine for the treatment of cancer. The IAA has identified 14 African countries who are embarking or have indicated their interest to embark on nuclear power programs, 6 of which are LDCs. And there's a huge diversity between these 14 countries in terms of the current level of development and infrastructure that would be required to support a nuclear power program safely and securely. Egypt, Nigeria, and Ghana are the most advanced in this regard, and South Africa has had nuclear power for more than 50 years. So the building blocks of sustainable use for nuclear technologies include a regulatory authority. You cannot use nuclear technology or nuclear material without a regulatory authority to control and manage radiation. This also applies to the use of linear accelerators. Any instrument and material that produces significant levels of radiation used by hospitals, laboratories, and industries, etc., require monitoring and control to protect people and the environment from the harmful effects of radiation. Less than 10 countries in Africa have a nuclear law and a properly constituted body to administer that law and monitor compliance. A significant stumbling block in these countries is that they don't prioritize nuclear regulatory processes, as they are not expecting to use nuclear energy for power production. The IAEA and international partners are putting a lot of effort into supporting countries in developing laws and establishing these authorities. However, until these countries realize the benefits of nuclear technologies for development, they may not invest the time and energy in putting the first essential building blocks into place. So this brings us to government commitment. There can be no significant or lasting benefits from peaceful uses without government commitment. Apart from investing in regulatory infrastructure, the government must also be willing to commit necessary human resources to advancing peaceful uses and mainstream nuclear technology in national policy frameworks. In February 2020, a workshop was convened in South Africa by Wilton Park in association with the African Commission for Nuclear Energy, AFCO, and the Government of Canada on expanding pathways for expanding peaceful uses for nuclear technology and nuclear energy. African agriculture, health, energy, and environmental experts identified there the lack of awareness among African policymakers and their international counterparts of the benefits of peaceful uses as a significant obstacle to expanding peaceful uses in Africa. Another challenge identified by the experts was the lack of integration of peaceful uses into national development agendas and policy frameworks. Key recommendations for overcoming these challenges was that the contribution of peaceful uses to the SDGs be championed at national and regional and international levels, and that governments integrate peaceful uses into their development agendas and policy frameworks. One of the key lessons learned from a case study we did on Bangladesh is that national nuclear institutions that develop and apply nuclear technologies should be closely aligned with national agricultural research and extension establishment to influence agriculture policies and to ensure that the seeds developed are distributed through mainstream agriculture to farmers. There are countries in Africa that develop seeds with the support of the IAEA for the improvement of their crops, but are unable, for example, to distribute these seeds because their legislation does not allow it. Another lesson learned from Bangladesh was the importance of close regional cooperation, which allows countries to exchange plant materials from similar agroclimatic environments and to share expensive equipment. There are countries in every sub-region of Africa that have an infrastructure and capacity to act as a powerhouse in the region to assist their neighbors, both with power and non-power applications. Many of our challenges are transboundary in Africa. Pests and diseases that affect animals and human health and crop production, as well as the effects of climate change. Countries that do not have the national capacity and resources to apply nuclear technologies will benefit from regional cooperation and support. Access to technologies is also key to sustainable use. Between 2003 and 2013, denials and delays of radioactive shipments affected the delivery of radioactive materials and medical isotopes used in life-saving application for cancer diagnosis and treatment. So measures were taken by the IAEA to address this crisis by 2013, but it continues to be a problem, and the crisis is raising its head again as shipping companies are complaining that over-regulation and lack of harmonization of regulation is resulting in them frequently being denied entry into ports. And as a result, fewer carriers are interested in transporting radioactive sources. As a result of that, of course, the access to gamma sources, especially used in medical and agriculture and industrial sectors, are becoming increasingly expensive and they're harder to come by. There are real concerns that radioactive sources may not be available to countries who do not develop their own radioactive sources. As mentioned, alternative technologies require much research and development to ensure that they can be used as routine technologies in developing countries. The best case scenario in terms of the sustainable access to nuclear technologies would be that countries have the choice of gamma technologies as well as alternative technologies and continue to do so in the future. So just in conclusion, global peace and security requires not only that we put measures in place that will eliminate nuclear weapons, reduce the risks posed by proliferation of sensitive nuclear technologies and materials, and reduce the potential of nuclear terrorism. It also requires that we maintain a critical balance between these measures and achieving sustainable development, as fighting poverty is at the heart of our security system. And I'll leave you with a message from erstwhile President Thabo Mbeki, who said that a global human society based on poverty for many and prosperity for a few, characterized by islands of wealth, surrounded by a sea of poverty, is unsustainable. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ah, perfect. Okay, so, and you can see my slides?
Also, yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the invitation. And also thank you very much, Ingrid, for really giving us a global view of the challenges on various aspects of radioactive sources and radiation. And for my presentation, I actually wanted to focus on what is possible, which are the challenges in facing the continent, both in terms of cancer rates, ratios, and the treatment. And Ingrid has already touched on the fact that I want to start with this slide, and that is, how can you use radiation both for treatment and at the same time eliminate or try to reduce the security challenges linked with this? So the reason I show this slide is I want to show that how can we turn Africa green, in the reason being that on the left we have the number of facilities for treating radiation with cancer with radiation, source activities like Linux, if you like, and the greener it is on that map, the better it is going to be, because those are the ones that have the best facilities, the last number, and the red ones have no facilities at all. And then if we can make that green, but also reduce the amount of radioactivity challenges, then of course we win on both sides, okay? So I wanted to, I don't know what's happened. Okay, so this is just to say that in Africa, unfortunately, there are dramatic disparities in access to cancer treatment. In particular, I want to talk about Linux, but in radiation therapy in general. And this is just to give you an idea that in Africa, a population of more than 1 billion people has 385 RT Linux. And if you look at like the US, a population of 330, which is almost 4,000 Linux. So how do we get not disparity, but parity? What can we do both in terms of technological challenges and the new technology to make equal access, shall we say. And so one of the things we are looking at, as I said, is cancer. It's a growing global challenge, not just in Africa, but everywhere. And in 2018, there were 18 million new cases and 9.6 million deaths. And this is, of course, going up and up. Unfortunately, 70% of these will occur in LMICs. And when we start looking at Africa, 10% of the patients in low income and only 40% in middle income. And yet half of the patients should be treated with radiation therapy. So what can we do in terms of technology to make that match? Okay. Now, just as a quick view of what is the current situation in Africa, as okay, there's an acute shortage, there's very few machines, the situation is not improving in terms of cancer, unfortunately causing the incidence is going up. 27 countries don't have any access, and only 60% of the LINACs at the moment, which is the most advanced treatment available, is in 3 countries. And so, and we just heard Ingrid mention cobalt. In 18 countries still have cobalt machines because they are the workhorse for a lot of these treatments in this environment. And there are 88 of these machines. And of course, if you have a poorer economy and less expertise and so on, then you're going to go for a machine which is affordable, which has more access and is the workhorse. So, however, what we would like to do is to try to give state-of-the-art treatment for everybody, okay? So I just wanted to have a quick overview, but Ingrid has mentioned this already, so I don't want to spend too much time, just to say that, you know, the challenges between cobalt and LINAC is cobalt, of course, works well, but not as well as the LINAC, okay? And it's more compact, there are very well-defined distributions, and I'm sure Oni will tell us a little bit more about that. And what is really important is that if you use cobalt for treatment, the actual radioactivity goes down with time. And of course, then there are a lot of adjustments have to be done to be able to treat the same way as you did at the beginning. Whereas if you use LINACs, there is no decreased activity with time. And the challenge is this one, is the cost and operational needs. You know, it's widely used, it's less costly, it's more reliable, less downtime, you need less engineers and all of this. So then why would you use LINACs, right? The reason why you need to use LINACs is because they give the best possible treatment, more precise, state-of-the-art, and you know, downtime, all sorts of things, power intervention, higher operational costs. So if we could make this similar to this, there would be no, think about which one you should choose. So this is one of the challenges that we have to look at. And once again, Ingrid has mentioned this, that one of the challenges of cobalt machines is that they require close attention because of treatment implications, because it's an ongoing radioactive source. With LINACs, it's on and off when it's not burning. If it's not turned off, there's no radioactivity. There are safety and security issues, there's storage issues. And then as the cobalt source activity goes down, you should change it. So, you know, it's in every 6 years or so, but it's still highly radioactive. So you have to dispose of it safely. We just heard, you know, shipping and all of these things that are big challenges. And so often this is not in the initial price. So you don't have a budget for that. So how do you handle all of this? And then, as we've said, you know, lack of adequate disposal, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many challenges, but the first solution would be, let's buy cobalt, it's cheap, it's easy, it's a workhorse, okay? So what we have been looking at in terms of our collaboration is how can we try to make LINAC machines the same way as cobalt, okay? So this is, you know, to be able to give all these. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but so the problem is we need lots of machines. The challenge is complex, labor intensive and high cost. So let's design a good machine. Let's use technologies which we have to be able to do the same thing that cobalt can do. And interestingly, the very first patient treated with LINACs, the technology which should be state of the art, the first patient in the UK in 1953, first patient in the US 56, and coming from CERN, which is an accelerated technology lab, I can tell you that there is very little accelerator technology advances in the Linux. It's more or less the same in terms of the accelerator part. Detection, electronics, computing, yes, but not the actual machine. And what we want is Linux, which have longer lives, they're more robust, they're modular, so like Lego pieces. If a piece fails, you can replace it. It should be resilient. You should have need for fewer experts, because this, of course, there's a shortage of also professional experts, and improve performance, all the things you would like to have. So what can we do to make this happen? So one of the things we have been involved in since now 2016, and this is where I met Oni, because she came to the very first workshop at CERN, was to bring together experts from accelerators, clinicians, medical physicists, computer people, and saying, how do we make that leap to be able to do what we would like to do? And this is the last number of workshops. We've been trying to define the problem, see what is needed at the grassroots, not was sitting in Geneva saying, we know what you need in Africa, really have the experience from the people who need to use it. And our last workshop, unfortunately, was 2019, because last year, because of COVID, we couldn't have it. It was supposed to be in Oxford, my second home after CERN. And so the last workshop was in Gaborone, Botswana, to find out from actually the grassroots and from them, and look at the facilities, what do they have? So this was our way of moving forward. And all of this has resulted in Project Stella, which I actually have the honor to coordinate, and it's smart technologies to extend lives with linear accelerators. So it's really a global collaboration, and it's all about finding the information, identifying the challenges, create specification, and as we would say in the physics world, make a conceptual design and then make a technical design and then realize the prototype. So these are the stages we are around here at the moment. And what we did was, in order to make sure that we take into account the challenges in different environments in Africa, we actually had a detailed survey in which we asked about, is it the environment? Is it the services? Is it the subsystem? What fails? What doesn't? Do you have computer networks so you could do online training, do a secondhand consultancy, all sorts of things we would like to know to make sure our prototyping is suited for what we need. And we were very lucky, because with the help of collaborators at Taufik Igi from Nigeria and Hubert Foy, as you know very well, we were able to get answers from all African countries that have Linux-based RT. I mean, this is really amazing for me that we actually could get that sort of collaboration. So all 28 countries were able to give this input. And so the ultimate goal for us is, as I said, robust, modular, simple to use, but state of the art. It cannot be a cheap knockoff so that it looks, no. And at the same time, it has to be affordable, capital costs, operating costs, service maintenance costs. Sometimes the machines look really cheap, but the operating costs and particularly maintenance costs is where you fail. And also try to reduce the number of experts needed, because we don't have so many experts, okay? And of course, always is increasing the number of treated patients. And by the way, if all of that works, it's not just for Africa, it's for high-income countries too. And particularly after the COVID situation, we realize health budgets are being cut. So anything that's going to make that happen in Africa is going to make happen everywhere. So with the aim is improve patient throughput, increase effectiveness, decrease, expand, okay? So state of the art is what is important. And of course, to be able to do collaborations like that, you don't do it alone. You really need a global collaboration, and you need the people who are using it to be on board right up front. This is one of the things we learn at CERN is we are often doing, the Large Hadron Collider, which you might have heard of, the Higgs boson or black holes. If you don't have the people around the table up front, it's really hard to make sure that you all move together. So this is what we are trying to do. We are on the way, but it's going to take some time. So I want to thank all my collaborators, but also thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for having me today. It's wonderful to see some old friends and to meet some new faces. So just to build on what Manjit was talking about, I want to just talk about some practical applications of radiation therapy. So to begin with, if someone has heard me talk before, I always start with my why, and my why is my aunt, Miranda. So I was about 12 years old when I came face to face with cancer. She was living in Nigeria at the time and had been diagnosed with breast cancer. So when I saw her, if you look closely at her left neck, there were side effects of her treatment. And of course, at the age of 12, I didn't know what that was due to. But as fate would have it, I became very engaged in fighting cancer and ultimately discovered that her side effects were due to radiation therapy. And that's what I ultimately ended up selecting as my profession. So my aunt's experience with breast cancer in Nigeria, a low middle income country, then spurred me on to want to influence cancer positively in other settings. So we all know that basically breast cancer, cancers affecting women, which is what I focus on, are still a big problem. The most recent GlobalCan statistics show that breast cancer comprises almost 12% of cases globally. And if we're just looking at women, it takes up almost a quarter of the cases. We also know that, you know, one of the cancers that I focus on, cervical cancer, which has become a focus of the UN and the WHO, affects up to 7% of women each year. But that's a cancer that we can do a lot to intervene on, whether it comes to prevention by doing pap smears or once it's diagnosed using surgery or radiation and chemotherapy to cure it. So I focus on cancers that affect women, breast and cervical cancer, and that's the lens that I'm going to use today. So every year, 2 million women worldwide are diagnosed with breast or cervical cancer. And unfortunately, the majority of these deaths are in low and middle income countries. We know that 7 out of 10 breast cancer deaths occur in these nations, and 9 out of 10 cervical cancer deaths are happening in low and middle income countries. These malignancies are devastating not just to the women who are experiencing them, but also their family. My colleagues and I actually did an analysis showing that there's a link between child mortality and also maternal mortality due to breast and cervical cancers. So what we found was that for every 100 women who die from breast or cervical cancer, between 14 to 30 children will die as a result. And this was particularly striking on the African continent. So unfortunately, if a woman has 3 children and dies of breast or cervical cancer, at least one of them might not make it into adulthood. So one of the ways we're trying to address this is to, as Manjit was saying, increase radiation therapy capacity, particularly on the African continent. And as we've discussed, moving from cobalt-60 to a 3D linear accelerator has a number of benefits. People have mentioned it before. Basically, with the cobalt, one benefit is that you don't have to replace the source as often, whereas with the linear accelerator, you have to do frequent quality assurance checks. But we're hoping to move from cobalt to the linear accelerators because there are a lot of benefits. As Manjit was pointing out, first of all, we don't have the issues of the radioactive source, having to dispose of it, having to make sure that the off switch is working. But the issue is that with the linear accelerator, we're asking a lot more from people. There are a number of processes that have to be in place in order for us to treat people safely with a linear accelerator. So these are the steps that I've outlined below. Simulation, meaning that we get images of the patient when they come in using a CT scanner. We also have to perform contouring, meaning that we have to outline the normal tissues as well as the tumor tissue or the area that we want to treat. You have to know how to design plans. So we have to now also train individuals to use the software to create appropriate plans, make sure that the plans are appropriate, that the dose going to different structures is correct. And then we also have to be able to deliver these ideal plans that we've put together. So it's very labor intensive. And we're asking a lot of these nations that are moving forward from cobalt to linear accelerators. So this touches on a passion of mine, capacity building. We can't expect people to move from cobalt 60 machines to linear accelerators without capacity building. And I know that we have some experts on the panel like Dr. Fisseha, who know a lot about this. But basically, capacity building is the process by which individuals and organizations basically obtain, improve, and keep the skills and the knowledge that they need in order to do their jobs competently. In anything that we do, there's a learning curve, right? Whether it's learning how to dress ourselves as we're children, or whether you're trying to learn how to code, there's a learning curve. And I want to emphasize that, a lot of times people think about low and middle income countries switching to new technologies and say, oh, they have so much to learn. But the same is true for all countries. And that's why I put this picture here. This is actually representing a series that was published in the New York Times. So when in the 2000s, countries like the United States started moving to more complex radiation therapy plans, something called intensity modulated radiation therapy, which involves a lot more fields, which involves a lot more quality assurance checks. A number of missteps happened. So this is unfortunately a man in New York who had too much radiation dose given to him, and he went blind as a result and died. So whether you're in a high income country, a low middle income country, when you're trying to learn something new, there is there's a learning curve and there's the opportunity to do harm, but we press forward because we have the opportunity to do a lot of good. And capacity building is going to be a big part of us moving from cobalt 60 machines to linear accelerators successfully. So that's what I've tried to engage in through a number of different projects, which I'll talk about. So this is a project that we did in Gabon. I think we have some participants there who might recognize the Institut de Cancérologie in Libreville, Gabon. So I was able to get a grant from Cornell's Center for International Studies, and we traveled to Libreville, myself, a recent graduate of Cornell University, a radiation therapist, as well as one of my radiation oncology residents. And we met a number of wonderful physicians, Dr. Lorianne James and all her other colleagues who we worked with to give lectures talking about breast and cervical cancer treatment with the linear accelerators. We also made sure to go around seeing what their capacity was, what machines are they using, what's currently in place. And I have to say that they have excellent knowledge, they have an excellent grasp of what they're doing. And it was just wonderful to work with a group of individuals who were motivated to push forward. So actually with them, once we verified that they were comfortable with the usual three-dimensional treatment using a linear accelerator for breast cancer, we moved forward. Where you see down below in the panel, we actually started looking at the possibility of giving radiation therapy in the prone position, meaning that patients are lying on their bellies instead of lying on their backs. And what that does is it decreases the dose of radiation that is delivered to a woman's heart or lungs. So this is part of what is needed, I think, walking side by side with individuals as they transition from one mode of treatment to the next. And then so that's the simulation process that I showed you before. The other important step when you're moving from two-dimensional treatment with cobalt machines to three-dimensional treatment is that you have to understand what you're seeing. You have to know what it is that you want to treat and outline it accordingly. So this is just showing you, I also do a lot of work in Armenia, and they were interested when they started using a linear accelerator to treat their breast cancer patients in learning how to really draw the correct regions for treatment. So this is a breast cancer patient, and I had each of the physicians outline what they thought needed to be treated. And in the blue, you'll see in the blue outline is the ideal structure. And in the yellow are the different participants' answers about what needed to be treated. So if you draw much larger than the blue, you have, you know, some possibility of over treating regions, and there can be side effects that you don't want as a result of that. Also, even more importantly, if you only think that this, you know, the inner yellow is what needs to be treated as compared with the blue, you have possibility for under treatment, and that can lead to you missing sites that are at risk of the cancer coming back after surgeries. So we went through those exercises for people who have undergone a lumpectomy, meaning only part of the breast was removed. We also did it for people who have undergone a mastectomy, meaning that the entire breast has been removed and that you need to treat the chest wall. In addition, in many of these low and middle income countries, women come at a more advanced stage of cancer, meaning that the cancer has gone from the breast to nearby lymph nodes in their armpits or in their neck. And it's very important that you are treating these sites adequately when you're using linear accelerators. So you have to draw the right area for treatment. And again, we were looking at treatment of the neck. What is the ideal outline that you should use? So the blue again is the ideal, and the yellow are the different participants' responses. So you can see there was a wide variation. Some people were including the bone, the clavicle here, which is not appropriate. Others were treating muscle back here, which is not what is supposed to be done. So we were able to really pinpoint and target what needs to be treated and give people the skills that they need to capacity build so that they can use new technology safely. And the same goes for this region, internal mammary lymph nodes, meaning lymph nodes that lie under the chest wall that should also be addressed with radiation in advanced breast cancer cases. So we've also done some work. I focus on both breast and gynecologic cancers. And I like to think that the legacy began at Cornell for cervical cancers. This is a picture of George Papanikolaou, who created the Pap smear, which we can use in order to prevent or detect cervical cancer at its early stages when it's much more easily cured. And we have a bust of him at the entrance to the Cornell Medical School. So based on this, I've gone around to different nations, done some work in Armenia, again, giving lectures and also working with them. I brought my radiation therapist with me. And as you can see, I'm a willing participant. I just don't talk it. I get up there and I engage in the lessons. So this is where we were trying to show them how to make molds of people's bodies, because when you're now moving to three-dimensional radiation therapy, you need to first know how to set up people properly to get the images, and then again outline the images where you want to treat. So this was just a hands-on demonstration for those individuals. And this is just representing the benefits of using the linear accelerator and three-dimensional radiation therapy. When you're using cobalt and two-dimensional radiation, this is representative of something that you might see. You know, you're basically just seeing the pelvic bones. You're not seeing where the cervix is, where the tumor is, where the normal organs are. But if you move to three-dimensional linear accelerator-based radiation therapy, you can see where the cervix is outlined in red. You can see where the rectum is outlined in brown, as well as the bladder outlined in yellow. And you can kind of adapt your treatment so that you're focusing the radiation dose on the tumor in the cervix rather than, giving too much dose to your normal organs and causing a lot of side effects in the process. So one way that we emphasize this, I don't know if this will work, is through teleconferencing. Yeah, I'm in 2 places now. So this is with 2 grace, like you mentioned. So she was what, 2 millimeters? I think it was. So that's just showing you that we use remote teleconferencing. I've been able to do it with colleagues in Nigeria, colleagues in Armenia, colleagues in Ghana, in order to just keep up the discussions, because capacity building isn't just coming to show someone one time, this is what you do. It's how to also maintain those skills. So we've been able to use remote teleconferencing in order to keep up and to discuss future cases and what might people do for this. So in conclusion, linear accelerator-based radiation therapy has multiple benefits compared to cobalt-60 radiation therapy. However, we need to invest in capacity building for all the steps in order to make sure that it's successful. So I want to thank you all for having me and inviting me, and I look forward to us having a robust discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor to be here today to talk about the capability of the civil and scientific application of the CTBT verification technologies. Before I start talking about the applications, because when I listen to the previous speakers, my talk might look different. So to put it in the context, I'll first explain what is the CTBT for the benefit of those who hear this for the first time. The CTBT is a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty that bans nuclear explosions underground, underwater, and over the atmosphere, both for military and peaceful purposes. The treaty will enter into force once signed and ratified by 8 countries. These are nuclear technology holders: China, Egypt, DPRK, India, Iran, Israel, Pakistan, and the uniqueness. So what makes this treaty unique is the treaty is verifiable. It's the unique treaty among all non-proliferation and disarmament treaties that could be verified. How? It's through the IMS. It's an element of the verification, in fact. It comprises 337 facilities. That's where it comes interesting, because these facilities are located in 90 different countries around the world, and it's a $1 billion investment. So you can see that however one country is powerful, no single country can maintain and sustain and operate such a sophisticated system. This system is comprising of 4 technologies. We call them waveform technologies: the seismic, hydroacoustic, and infrasound, and the radionuclide technologies. It's a pleasure to tell you that 90% of this is already complete. Now, many of these stations are located in remote and inaccessible regions of the globe. Africa being the host of so many of these seismic, hydroacoustic, infrasound, and radionuclide technologies. Our participants of this training will be very happy to know the wealth of information that I'm going to share with you, a takeaway, which I invite you later, showing you a few examples of data coming from these stations. But for treaty verification purposes, this data, whether real-time data or processed are coming to Vienna, the headquarters, through a global communication infrastructure called GCI. Once the data arrived at the IDC, they're processed, and also raw data is back to state signatories, to authorized users through the global communication infrastructure. Now, the biggest challenge for us is maintaining these stations. But the good news, a contractual agreement have been already established with local operators, ensuring that utilities, software, hardware is in place, sending the data continuously to Vienna. Now, what will happen once the data has arrived in Vienna? As you see from this pipeline processing, once the raw data, whether it is seismic, hydroacoustic, infrasound, the waveform technology, which arrives faster, the data are processed, analyzed, screened. We call data fusion because we are now fusing several technologies in once. This sophisticated algorithms is capable of producing a bulletin less than 1 hour. The first bulletin, standard event list 1, is ready to be sent to state signatories almost less than 2 hours after an event has occurred. It's also then further processed using interactive analysis. Once the interactive analysis is completed, the algorithms will continue, and we use an event screening criteria to be able to say that the event is natural or artificial event. So this is a quite complicated process, and the pipeline processing will continue. Just for information purposes, the radionuclide component, which we have been seeing a lot of applications from our previous speakers, will arrive later. As you see, this is time. Then it will be included in the bulletin, and all raw plus processed data will be distributed to state signatories in a timely fashion. So why we are doing this? This is for treaty verification purposes. Both this raw data and analysis data are sent to state signatories. Since 2000, almost more than 0.6 millions of reviewed event bulletin have been sent to state signatories. So for those of you who are with a geophysics background, you can see the location of the event exactly falling with the plate tectonics. But the task now is finding one single event among these 0.6 million of events. The reason why we are doing this is these event parameters are extremely important, because if one of these events happened to be a nuclear explosion, when the treaty enters into force, an on-site inspection can be invoked in case of a suspicious event using these locations. On-site inspection. On-site inspection is possible only after the treaty is entered into force. This is a final verification measure to verify state parties' compliance with the CTBTO. But the purpose, what is the purpose of on-site inspection? The sole purpose of an on-site inspection is to clarify whether a nuclear weapon test explosion has been carried out, and precisely, and most importantly, to gather any facts. So it's simply a fact-finding mission. The treaty prescribes the details of how an on-site inspection should be conducted. It's through Executive Council voting process, but the treaty precisely described how the inspection should be triggered, who should prepare and conduct, what scientific techniques and procedures should be applied, which information should go to the report, and so on and so forth. For example, for you to understand, this on-site inspection is very different from other inspections, such as the IAEA inspections. For example, there are no standing inspectorate in CTBTO, such as IAEA or OPCW. The inspection team is determined. They shouldn't exceed 40, a team of 40 inspection team, unless there is a drilling requirement. And there is not any type of inspection equipment that they can take, but there should be a specified approved list of equipment. And the area to be inspected shouldn't exceed 1,000 square kilometer, as well as the duration of the inspection in that country shouldn't exceed 130 days. So you can see that to be able to arrive at a conclusion in a different country within this period of time, OSIs are extremely challenging, technologically complex. The techniques and activities are very specific for geophysicists. The inspection team, for example, arrives in a country, has the right to conduct an initial overflight to help the team get oriented. In the inspection period, as soon as the inspection started, the techniques that we use are listed. The first few days: position finding, visual observation, still photography, multispectral imaging, including infrared, measurement of level of radioactivity, and passive seismology, because if a nuclear explosion occurred, then there would be a follow-up aftershocks. So a passive seismological monitoring techniques would be used. And the treaty also specifies that for continuation period, then there are more intrusive techniques, such as resonance seismometry, magnetic field mapping, ground penetrating radar. So these are more intrusive. Once then we rule out and eliminate polygons and we arrive at the technique, at specific area, then drilling is also one of the inspection activities. Now, just to give you an example, the primary purpose of these verification technologies or techniques that I just described is for treaty verification purposes. For example, the seismic event in the Democratic Republic of Korea, all of them has been detected. So the IMS verification system works. I'm sure you have been following this closely. The IMS system swiftly, reliably, and precisely detected all the 6 DPRKs declared nuclear tests. The CTBTO monitoring stations, if you look at just the last example of 2017, both IMS primary and auxiliary seismic stations detected the event. Over 100 of our stations contributed to the analysis of this data, both primary seismic stations, auxiliary seismic stations, hydroacoustic stations, and 1 infrasound stations detected the event. The initial magnitude of this event was 6.1, and the event was significantly larger than earlier ones recorded to the system, and the location estimate shows that the event took place in the area of the Democratic Republic of Korea's previous nuclear test sites. Right,
Dr.
so,
Fisseha,
yes.
I'm helping up because I'll give you 1 minute, not more. We're already speaking for 12 minutes.
Right, okay, so this is the important part, the civil and scientific application. There are 80 radionuclide technologies, 60 infrasound. If I mention a few examples, this is a meteor exploded over Russia's mountain. If we look at even the recent examples of meteorite shower observed in Turkey's cities on 27th of May, this has been detected by stations from Germany to Djibouti. The spacecraft launched from Kennedy, even during the COVID-19 lockdown. This has been working and showing that the IMS is functioning as more than expected. Now, the tsunami agreement is another application. I just wanted to focus on the VDEC, the virtual data exchange center. To summarize, even though the primary purpose of this data and products was for proliferation and proliferation purposes, there is a wealth amount of information that we invite scientists like yourself to explore through VDEC. VDEC, or Virtual Data Exchange Center, is a zero contract that is signed with the CTBTO for scientists to discover. There are several examples of projects. I don't have time to go through it now, but if you are interested, please go to ctbto.org. The most interesting part, to be able to understand how this works, the CTBTO is hosting a capacity building program, providing trainings, offering softwares, offering infrastructure support, a capacity building system that a country can own and install to receive this data, process this data, analyze this data, for state signatories not only participate, but contribute to make the world a safer place. If you have any question, please go to www.ctbto.org. I would be happy to answer it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. I hope you can all hear me. I will speak without slides because I think in the current mode, what works best for me, that is to have visual contact with my victims, so to speak. I would like to start by saying what WINS is. WINS is the World Institute for Nuclear Security. And it is an organization that works on the professionalization of individuals who have an interest in this field and have an occupation in the field of where there are materials nuclear and materials radioactive. It is free and easy to go in and become a member of WINS, and you just go to wins.org and you sign up to become a member. And once you're a member, you have access to a lot of publications that are worthwhile for anyone interested in nuclear security. And nuclear security and radiological security are two issues that are very important for us all in this domain. So I encourage you to go in and have a look. We also have access to certified trainings in these areas, and we're developing more certified trainings as we speak. And there is a price tag for having these certified trainings, but we have access to scholarships that are generously provided by international funding. So it's possible to have a scholarship and go through the trainings that we offer. So this is a small encouragement to everyone. Then I will say that the issue in which WINS is occupied is, of course, much bigger and broader. And it's also one that has deep historical roots. And in the course of spring, I started working with Ingrid that you heard earlier. We started working on carving out the issue of the relationship between peaceful uses of nuclear energy and nuclear security. And as you probably heard and understood in various contexts, this is to a large extent a quite contagious issue. And this is unfortunately the case because there are a couple of underlying issues that are old, intrinsic, and difficult to solve. And as Ingrid and we have gone through this issue, we have actually also discovered that this is an issue that in principle has become harder and harder to solve. And that is what I will try to explain now, why this has become harder and harder. And then one thing to consider, and where I think both WINS and the VCDNP has a role, that is to find a way over these hardships and finding a way of aligning the various needs that countries have for the access to peaceful nuclear uses of nuclear and radiological technologies and aligning them with reasonable requirements on nuclear security and security of these technologies. And I will start with the roots, and that is to go back to the 1940s. It was immediately understood in the 1940s that, okay, here were nuclear weapons that had been used against Japan, and that had led to the end of World War II. But here was also something that was a prosperous new technology that could be used for energy purposes, and various other prospects soon stood out. And it was understood that this was both, you know, a pleasure and a pain. It can end up in the worst circumstances, but also lead to very promising results for mankind. And throughout the 1940s and into the 50s, there were discussions on how to square this circle. And it was by no means easy. And then when the IA was formed, one of the bargains in the IA statute, and it's still there and it's still being carried to a large extent by the technical cooperation program of the IA. But one of the bargains was that, okay, there's going to be control over nuclear materials, and there's an ambition for the IA to collect nuclear materials from the states that at the time had nuclear weapons, and then turn this into peaceful uses by other countries who would want to go in this direction. And this was in order to fulfill this request by the great majority of states internationally to be able to have access to these technologies. So that's enshrined in the statute of the IA. Then came the negotiations. And then, of course, I have also to say that it was not a straight road, and it was not that the access to these technologies, that they were solved immediately, because it's namely one thing, and this is very important. It's one thing that you have the right to it, but it's something else whether there are states that want to sell it to you. And that is one of the recurring issues that I think no one has actually really dealt with, meaning that you have the right to develop and have peaceful nuclear uses, but it's not the same that you can get these technologies at all. It depends on whether anyone is there to sell it to you. Then came the negotiations over the nuclear proliferation treaty throughout the 60s, and it basically ended in the same bargain once more. Namely, you have the inalienable rights to the development of nuclear technologies for peaceful purposes. But there are these requirements and safeguards on the nuclear and fissile materials, and so on. I would say in various different fashions, and with a couple of institutional attempts to solve this intricacy, nothing much happened throughout the 1970s and 80s, but it all changed from 1991 and onwards. And this is something that's really striking, and it's something that has stricken Ingrid and me when we worked on this, is that everything changes. Because before 1991, what the world was occupied with, that was the risk that a certain state would use access to nuclear technologies and materials to proliferate and build nuclear weapons. After 91 comes in that there is a risk also of nuclear terrorism. And that came with the breakup of the Soviet Union on the one hand, that there were radioactive and nuclear materials suddenly discovered outside of facilities and in faraway places from where the materials were supposed to be. So that led into suspicion, well, there could be something like, nuclear terrorism or radiological terrorism. And then it also linked up with the first Gulf War in 1991, where there was a discovery of Saddam Hussein's Iraq having far-reaching plans in as concerns developing of weapons of mass destruction. And here it all came together, this cocktail of fears that there could be materials coming from one place of the world and venturing then, for instance, into the Middle East, where the materials could be turned into usable assets in the various conflicts. This was a fear that lived for a long time throughout the 1990s, and it all exploded and became even worse than in 2001 with the 9/11 attacks in New York and Washington against the US, because that led to an upsurge in international efforts against terrorism, including against radiological and nuclear terrorism, making it even more restricted what it was states could get access to, and the requirements not only being directed against states who would maybe build nuclear weapons, but also against states and their institutions who would maybe need radioactive materials for other purposes, not even related to anything close to anything military, but just the prospect of it could be even small amounts of radioactive materials that could find their way into the hands of terrorism. That was a new terrifying scheme. So that is to say that, you know, it used to be that for your desire to have access to peaceful uses, you had to penetrate one layer of objections or obstacles, and they would be, are you such a state who would or could maybe want to develop a nuclear weapons capacity? Into the 90s, are you such a state who could maybe want to have nuclear or radiological materials for various terrorist purposes? To the third layer, where it's not only a question of whether one country would want to do so itself, but also whether there would be others who could come and be malevolent against that country and steal its radioactive and nuclear materials and use it for something third. And I think this is where it is actually important to recognize that there has been this upsurge in international efforts to tighten everything relating to physical protection and nuclear security, to understand where we are today and why it is so difficult, many of the issues. Why is it that even the most innocent materials and technologies are difficult to import for certain countries? Well, it has a lot to do with how these institutions have mushroomed throughout the years in 2001. I can mention just 5, 6, 7 various international multilateral institutions that are there to create protection and install nuclear security as a very important guiding principles. And I have to say that it's probably without full recognition of how this creates obstacles in particularly developing regions of the world. And this is where a big agenda lies hidden. I could go more into detail on this, but I will not do so now. But I can say that it is one issue that since Ingrid and we started working on it, it has caught our attention, and it has also led us to saying that this is really an issue we need to address. It is one thing that we're concerned, and that we are concerned for good reasons. We don't want this to happen to our own countries. We don't want it to happen to a neighboring country. But we have not yet found the mechanisms by which we can also ensure that all the peaceful uses that are benign in substance and consequences, that they are also able to fully flare. So with that, I will just be very short here and tell you all that Ingrid and we hope to have a publication out in the course of spring that goes into more detail on this issue, and where we also hope that in the long run, this can set an agenda for a discussion on how we can pay attention more to this issue and probably come up with a solution also that is not only based on goodwill by certain states and institutions, but also gives institutionally anchored rights to developing regions of the world so that they can have access to peaceful uses in a good and secure and responsible manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. And I'm sure many of us will be looking forward to your and Ingrid's publication and attempts. I think you touched upon a very important subject here. Is like on one hand, we're trying to increase and expand the use of these technologies and applications, but there are coming with certain restrictions and regulations, be it non-proliferation or nuclear security, and how to find balance between them and how to ensure the sustainability of the use of this application is an extremely important task. I'm actually at loss a little bit. I need probably one of our organizers, either Margarita or Jean, tell me whether we have a little bit of time for Q&A. The panelists, you're wonderful. You've already been answering many questions in written form to the participants, but I still want to make sure that if we do have time, that we have a little bit of a live exchange on your Q&A. Margarita?
I think we would have, we would have to have some time. So please moderate as you wish. I think we could afford another 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes. Okay, that's great. And I know there are plenty of questions that are still posted there. Instead of me reading out them, because some of them are marked who they're intended for, and some of you may be still answering, what I would do is actually in the order we started, I will give each of the panelists 2 minutes to answer some of the remaining questions that are posed to them. You see them in Q&A, or add something else to the discussion, but it would really be 2 minutes. And I will be warning you, I'll be raising my hand with my phone when your 2 minutes are up. We'll go in the order that you have presented, and Ingrid, you would be first.
Okay, great, thank you. A question from Nesreen about commitment by policymakers. There's various reasons, Nesreen. One of them is really the lack of awareness about the contribution that peaceful uses makes and can make to the achievement of sustainable development goals. I think that's a big challenge that the international community faces. Researchers, policymakers, implementers of nuclear technologies, both in developing countries and developed countries. How do we get our policymakers, and it's not just African policymakers, it's globally, policymakers to understand the benefits of peaceful uses. At the moment, it's basically nuclear energy, nuclear power, policymakers who deal with nuclear power, defense. Our approach to peaceful uses has been one of non-proliferation and security. We need to expand that to development, to the area of development. Then there was a question that I had answered, and just to make a comment on the note about SIT for mosquitoes that would be good for Africa. There is a lot of research going on about at the IAA for using SIT for mosquitoes. It's more complicated because mosquitoes, especially malaria mosquitoes, are there's constant. They're evolving. I don't know. It has something to do with their eggs and the laying of the eggs, because you have to sterilize the male eggs so that you can release these sterile males. But there is a lot of research in this regard. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'll give the floor to Manjit next.
Thank you, Elena. So I don't want to take too much time because I know it took quite a lot of time in my presentation, but I think the main thing I wanted to say, because I've seen a number of questions also for Oni, which are linked, both the COBOL, the clinical and the training are linked very closely in that collaboration we have with Stella, which Oni is involved in as well. And just to say, what we realize is it's not enough to have a new wonderful technology. With it comes the education, training, mentorship. So we are paying a huge effort in this. And Oni is actually one of our young leaders in this initiative with the International Cancer Expert Corps, which is an NGO starting in Washington. And then recently we've understood that, of course, artificial intelligence, machine learning is very nice for new technologies, but it's also key for education, training, mentorship, and trying to put the technology together with the training so that you can also do remote interventions. But so I just wanted to say that, of course, Oni will answer a few questions as well, but all these things are very closely linked. And the reason I enjoyed very much this panel is how closely some of the topics are linked both with Ingrid and Misrak, and just showing that this horizontal need for all of us to be in touch with each other is really important. So thank you.
I couldn't agree more with what you've said. Indeed, they're so connected. But I'm hearing from Margarita that we actually have until 16:45, so we have 10 minutes, which is great. But unfortunately, Lars van Dassen needs to leave at 16:40. So I will break the order and then we'll probably give him the floor now. Lars, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the questions that are addressed to you specifically in Q&A. If not, then it seems like
I don't see any, but I might have.
Why don't I tell the questions? One question was, in your opinion, what steps can be taken to strengthen cooperation on many different aspects of peaceful uses of energy first? And the second is about the scholarships and training support for your programs, if you could say.
Yeah. Let me say, I think that there are things will be greatly helped if there is reciprocal understanding. If there is understanding that terrorism is a real threat, no matter where you are, then it'll be a great help for those who are active in this area. They are often also the ones who would have access to deciding whether a certain kind of export is allowed. If they are convinced that good security efforts are being made, then it is so much easier for them also to be positive towards granting export rights, etc. Then I also think that it is very important to think of the entire context in which a certain technology development takes place, that it is somehow anchored in a broad institutional manner domestically, but also maybe regionally, that we are now pursuing this technology to aid us with this and that purpose, and in a broader context, because then it makes it all look so much more convincing that here is something that is really being sought for, and that makes it all the more easier to have a certain be able to import a certain technology for whatever purposes. And I cannot help saying, and it is something that I maybe come to realize just as we sit and talk here, that some of the trainings that I mentioned earlier that WINS has can actually be of much assistance. And I have to say that we have many, or probably the largest part of our members, they are in various institutions in African nations. So we have a great membership already in African countries. And of course, to the extent that you can demonstrate that we have staff that are trained in security, we have various management layers and institutions that take these issues serious, that all contributes to presenting your case so much better for then, as a next step, being able to import all the things that you need for some of the issues that were mentioned earlier here. And I think that is very important. So please allow me to say that WINS wants to be your partner in all this. And if you have any gifted colleagues or you want to be one yourself in this regard, then do be in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Much appreciated. And I'm sure that many people would be interested, and I know how many of different supportive arrangements you have at WINS, particularly for practitioners to participate in your event. But I know there was such a plethora of questions coming to Dr. Balogun, but Oni, maybe I know you've answered many of them, but not all. And maybe some of the questions that you're answering maybe even make sense to hear for the broader audience. So you are next, please.
So thank you. I think some of the questions bring to light the issue of manufacture maintenance. And how do we do it? So I know that some of these linear accelerators, when they are provided, they come with costly contracts regarding maintenance. And then on top of that, availability of engineers in certain parts of the world is low. So sometimes people have to wait weeks for someone to travel to their site. So we've been advocating for it. As Manjit mentioned, the ICEC has been talking to these manufacturers about it, trying to make sure that that's not an obstacle. So we have to just increase availability of engineers on the ground and make sure that when people are putting together these contracts, that the people in charge of negotiating know what is needed, know to negotiate a reasonable price for maintenance. Because unfortunately, sometimes what we see is that the people placed in charge of securing machines are just like, oh, I have money, let me buy a machine, and may not have the knowledge necessary to execute properly. So hopefully what will happen is that we're getting the people who have the knowledge about what's necessary, not just to purchase the machines, but to keep it running down the line. And we'll also get buy-in from the corporations making the machines to bring down some of the prices and to make sure that engineers are available so that you don't have a really expensive machine that just doesn't function. Another question we had that I wanted to talk about is the front line. So a lot of times people focus the capacity building on the physicians, and that was a mistake that I made early on. I'll confess, I knew what I knew, and that's who I was going to deliver my education for. But it's it's a team process. And the people who are the front line are what we call therapists, the people who place the patient on the table, make sure that the dose is being delivered appropriately. You can create a beautiful plan, but if the person is not in the right position, if your therapist doesn't know that the person needs to be shifted 5 centimeters, everything is for naught. So someone made a very good point. I think it was Nosarim, who made a good point of saying, please make sure that you provide these educational sessions for the frontline. And I've been trying to do that in my projects, but I think, again, it would also be important for the companies to provide these kinds of training, maybe put together packages, making sure that when you're delivering the machinery, you also are providing a mechanism to train the front line, because they are absolutely crucial.
Oni, Well, that's a lot of work you guys do, and so many things that did indeed need to be measured and custom focused. We still have a couple of minutes or two, and I hope we could finish off with the some of the final comments from Fisseha. You okay? You're unmuted now.
Right. So the question, very good question, was whether the IMS monitoring system could be used for tsunami warning, which is, I think, was in my presentation, but I went quickly and didn't cover it. I would use this opportunity to say that the seismic technology and the hydroacoustic technology is designed, in fact, to detect acoustic energy, which is generated by underwater. And this can really play a role in tsunami warnings. And I can share the experience of following the catastrophic earthquake in Sumatra in 2004. CTBTO was working in collaboration with UNESCO and started sending data for test purposes. This has worked very well. And now more than 17 tsunami warning centers are receiving continuous data from the CTBTO for tsunami warning purposes, saving life. So these tsunami are being detected and warnings have been sent before it occurs. This is one of the civil and scientific application of CTBTO data, and thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. And thank you all the panelists. First of all, I think everybody would join me in appreciation of the work you do in all your many different capacities. This is amazing. It's very needed, very much needed on all these areas of the applications and capacity building and many other aspects you touched upon today. I also feel that we could have gone for another couple of hours just on this topic. And I hope that there will be future opportunities for us to engage on this. I know that what we do at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, the project that Ingrid is leading on the peaceful uses and in its safe, secure, and sustainable use, is something that we would certainly probably benefit from exposing more of the discussion we had today in a broader audience. So thank you very much, and thank you participants for excellent questions. My apologies that we were not able to address probably all of them, but this is as much as the beginning of conversation rather than it's the beginning of conversation, I would think, rather than the end of it. And I hope I will be in touch with many of you for future discussions focused on the application of nuclear science technology and in general